welcome back for another week at Ag in Conversation. This is week 3 of our farm succession series, delving into the ins and outs of farm succession. And this week we have Ross Neal from Rabobank joining us to give us a banking perspective, which will be really interesting because we've heard from Ash in terms of sort of that independent advice, and then Jackie last week around legal. So Ross and I met on Kellogg a couple of years ago, and Ross actually did his Kellogg project on farm succession and the ins and outs of that. So he helps with like that kind of background as well as having done it through banking. So yeah, we'll just crack on into it. And Ross, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about you, where you are from, and yeah, your background in banking. Just noting, Ross is, well, he'll tell you in a second, he's from Northland. He's wearing a t-shirt and it's like 15 degrees, and both Myfanwy and I were sitting here freezing our asses off down south with Myfanwy just is having some internet trouble. She'll join us in a second, but she's got her beanie and her like neck warmer and all sorts. So we're all feeling a bit jealous. He looks like he's on holiday.
Thank you for the introduction, Emily. Yeah, and nice to catch up after a couple of years. So yeah, just a bit about me. I'm born and bred on a dairy farm in Northland. So my family still farm today, milking about 950 cows. The farm's owned by my parents, and my brother is working as a contract milker. And so I grew up on the farm, and then after school went to uni, did ag business degree, and then have worked for a few different agri-businesses. Fonterra was my first role out of uni. Did a stint overseas playing rugby, then came back to work for Balance, and I have been with Rabo now for 9 years, or coming on 9 years. Really enjoying the banking role, and yeah, obviously get to delve into the intricacies of our clients' businesses and try be that support partner to try and help them achieve their goals.
Yeah, wicked. It's such a critical role, isn't it, in that farming partnership or farming team, having like a really good, strong banker that is on your side.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was probably one of the things that I think leads to great succession, is having that strong team around the farming business. So likes of an accountant, solicitor, and banker, farm consultant. We find that some of our clients have farm consultants, some don't. But yeah, just having a strong team around the business to understands the business and sort of understands where they're heading is really important.
Yeah. So you've really kicked us off there into farm succession. So this was actually inspired off the back of the Rabo white paper, which you have told me you weren't directly involved with, but obviously it's really interesting. One of the key stats that came through in that paper was around why we don't talk about farm succession. Like, so many people were just kicking the can down the road. Why do you think that is? Like, what are you seeing in your like anecdotal world around what's happening there?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because it's such a massive challenge in the industry, getting succession done right. And I think probably one of the big challenges is actually that communication. Yeah, just farming families being able to communicate.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I know if you think of the average farmer, they spend a lot of time by themselves on the farm. Communication sometimes isn't the strong point. And the topic of succession, it's pretty confronting, I suppose. A lot of older farmers might think it's a means to an end for them. So yeah, just that, really confronting nature about the topic. That can be a barrier to talk about with family. Also, you got the older generation and the younger generation. Quite often, I find the older generation don't want to pressure the younger generation into something they may not want. And then also on the other side, the younger generation, they don't want to be hassling mum and dad, and they don't want to feel like they are the ones pushing it either.
Right, so you've almost got two parties that are trying to do the right thing for each other by not pushing the situation, but in doing so, you've almost got this dance around the topic, potentially, that's
Yes.
Meaning that we're not actually, talking about the meat on the bones and getting things happening, which is quite interesting. And I guess you see that with challenging topics in lots of different areas of life, don't you? Where someone, there's almost no conversation because everyone's too scared to even get started.
Yes.
actually talking about it is the key to getting started.
The ones that do it well, that's probably something they do well, is their communication within the family is really good. Like, from a young age, they're getting, you know, the kids meet the bank manager and maybe sit in on those conversations. So that's what we really try and encourage is, if you're open to talking about the family business, like let's be open, and that encourages from a young age with the kids that they understand that that's quite a normal thing to talk about the family business. So later on, when it is time for those succession conversations, it's a lot easier.
It
That's a
makes a
really
lot
good
of
point
sense.
about starting those discussions really early, because you wouldn't really think that, but just being around it, even if they're just playing on the floor with some toys, and then slowly they graduate to drawing next to you while the bank manager's there, to slowly being included in the conversations, it's not alien. Whereas if you're asking someone to come back, jump into this and have an understanding of what's going on, suddenly at the age of 25, 35, whatever it is, it's actually quite a big ask.
Yeah, and probably as well for the ones that might not be coming back to the farm, they might also get a better understanding of how it works. Maybe there isn't all this money dropping out the bottom. And so, yeah, because get to that succession point, and it's a common phrase used that when things are all worked out, it may not be perfectly equal, but it'll be fair. So understanding that there's give and take.
Yeah, because if you've sat through even if you're not at every meeting, if you just do like a family meeting for the annual accounts or whatever, if you've sat through 5-10 years of annual accounts and 50% of them have been in the negatives or very close to break even or not that fruitful, you've got a really good idea that yes, you can make honey when when it rains, but other than that, it's not some gold pot, which probably tempers your expectations as well. So that you're
Yes.
not going in there as a non-farming person with expectations that then need to be sort of brought down to reality or whatever. Great practical tip. One thing you talked about there was the team as well that you've got around you, and you sort of mentioned all the different people. How important do you think is it that you get like an independent or both parties have that accountant, separate advice, and how do you find that works out really well? And what have you seen work in your experience?
So I guess if it's the parents that are looking to pass on the business, it's really, really important they've got a strong team around them, because if you think about, your accountant and your solicitor and your banker, even how you structure your business when you first set it up plays a really important part in enabling succession. So from my research that I did, it's going on 3 years old now, but it's still, a lot of the stuff is really relevant. I got to talk with some really interesting people and essentially experts in the field of succession. Ian Blackman, who wrote the book Keeping Farming in the Family, and John Redpath from Rural Coach. So they gave me some really good insights, and so it became very clear that structure, the best structure hands down for succession, is having a company that owns the assets and trusts in the background that own the shares within that company. So getting that structure set up from the start, if you can tick that box off and you've got an accountant that understands that structure is going to work for succession, that's a really, you're off to a good start.
Because that's quite tricky, isn't it? Because traditionally, correct me if I'm wrong, that structure with the company owning land isn't how businesses, were traditionally structured, is it? That's more of a new school of thought, isn't it, that we do it that way?
Yeah, like historically, there's a lot of trusts that own land, and they've been set up for one reason or another a long time ago. But I guess the issue with a trust owning the land is if you want to start succession, and essentially you got to sell that asset, because that asset's got to transfer from the trust to another entity. Whereas the beauty of a company is you can do it slowly over time, because if you think about the next generation coming in, the challenge is building equity,
sorry, just
right?
to cover that off, guys, the reason you can do it slowly over time is because people can buy shares in a company. You can't buy shares
Correct.
in a trust.
Yes.
So you can buy one share out of 1,000 in a company, but in a trust, it's a all or nothing.
All
Sorry,
or nothing,
Ross,
that's
continue.
right. And like the younger generation, the challenge is equity, and it's the same with when you go to buy your first house. The challenge is having enough equity to get in get into the market. And I guess with a company set up, like you can use the equity you've got and buy in what you can buy in at the start, and then from that point, like you can benefit from like equity gain over time. The land goes up in value, and you benefit in that equity gain, and then 5 years down the track you might be in a position to buy the next 10%, and you slowly do it over time. And biting off little chunks like that can be an easy way to achieve succession over time. And the good thing about that as well is for the parents, they've still got the control. They are still, they're almost in partnership with that next generation, and that can be quite a cool thing as well.
If the land is locked in a trust, which is a more traditional setup, it just means that handover of land is kind of all or nothing, isn't it? There's no parents remain in control, and like you said, it's quite a lot harder to get in, and so then you have to sell the trust into a new entity essentially, which can bring up tax implications potentially, can't it?
I'll stay clear of the tax conversation. That's not my.
I know you're a banker, not an accountant, but it did come up in your research, right, that was the risk there.
Absolutely.
That's so fascinating, because it's something that X amount of years down the track, we could be talking decades down the track, and that's you're like, goodness, I think that's a really good piece of advice for the next generation coming in, to have in our back pockets, of getting that set up at the start is so critical, because it actually, I think we had this conversation with Jackie last week as well. Getting the start right can really impact your exit.
Absolutely.
And if you're just thinking about the start, then you might miss the exit. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg.
Yeah. And I guess, like, we can't change the history. Like, you can't change a trust that's there at the moment. But yeah, if we can sort of, start to change that thinking from now on and get things set up right from the start, then
Great for Emily.
That should help in the future.
We're learning lots, so hopefully one day when we've got our own farms, we'll be able to set this up perfectly with all this advice. It's actually a really interesting point, and it sort of makes sense when you take it out of the context of farming. Farming so often runs as if farming isn't a business. I know there's land, I know there's other assets, there's a lot more to farming in many ways, but it's the same as a builder who may own a building plus his building business. He'll want to sell on that building business down the line when he retires, and the building itself might go somewhere else. So yeah, it's just interesting reframing, isn't it, and getting everyone to properly engage the brain into a way that we probably haven't previously in farming communities.
That's right.
Yeah, fantastic. What fabulous examples have you seen through your experience, or what sort of cautionary tales have you seen? Any gems that you can pull from them for us that we can share with our listeners?
Yeah, so like I touched on the communication piece, and getting that right. That's really, being able to communicate as a family is really important to enable those succession conversations, and having a good team around them. So we've just touched on those 2 points. So probably, like before you even think about succession, building and maintaining a financially viable business, that's critical. It's all good having this farm, that you want to pass on to the next generation, but if it's not making money in its current state, then it's going to be a lot harder once, you bring in the next generation. So
That's a good point.
yeah, building and maintaining a financially viable business, and that is an important factor when we're assessing a business. Is the business making money? Are the forecasts viable, and what does the long-term outlook look like? And quite often with succession, it's going to result in the overall business taking on more debt potentially. So if the business isn't performing in its current state, how is it going to perform once we take on more debt? So it's just really getting the basics nailed, and having that strong business leading into the succession piece.
That's a really good point, isn't it? Because everyone gets so tied up in getting the farm in sort of quotation marks, but what is the farm? Is the farm actually worth having, or are you just tying yourself to something, taking on a whole load of debt, and ending up with a whole load of problems down the line?
Absolutely. And in some cases, the succession plan is to actually sell the farm. Like it's horses for courses. But if you start early with that, looking at the financial viability of the business, and you do see some potential improvements that can be made, learning about that early, making those changes early, and putting the business in a strong position for growth, is, a great.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, almost taking off those rose-tinted glasses and make sure you are looking at the facts. I think I saw a quote yesterday that was Richard McCaw, focus on the facts, not the feelings. And I think sometimes when you're getting into these things, like you said, you're thinking about the feelings and the emotional side of it, but what you're saying, Ross, is actually really critical that those facts add up and
Yes.
those financials are there. Otherwise, you are sort of selling yourself up a ditch, really, aren't you?
That's right. And, that's why you've got your team around you as well. You've got your accountant, your banker. You can lean on them for, their feedback. Good to get the feedback from their viewpoint and then, take it all in and take action if you need to.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Just sort of changing tact slightly, and you kind of mentioned it, sometimes farm succession, the plan is to sell the farm. Another finding in that Rabobank report was the sort of, I guess, pretty large number that sort of probably surprised a lot of people, was that 39% of farmers don't have a next generation interested or don't have the next generation in taking over the family farm. And so they're having to exit the business altogether. And then obviously there's a huge number of people coming into the industry that don't have a farm to succeed either. So there's this almost like, I guess you'd put in quotation marks, non-traditional succession going on. What's your advice for both the exiters and the incomers? Because it probably is more challenging because you don't know them, less challenging because you don't have a lifetime of emotional connection. Like, there's just a whole lot of different, a whole different kettle of fish, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So, and this is where sort of equity partnerships come into play, right? So you've got a exiting generation and they want to bring in someone new. So once again, going back to that company trust structure, that really does allow for whether it is family coming in to the business or non-family. And probably the difference, with an equity partnership where you've got someone that you're meeting for the first time, maybe that you're partnering up with, it's really important to make sure you go into that agreement with really clear expectations, because you don't want to get 5 years down the track, have a fallout, and then be stuck in this equity partnership together. So just having a really, really clear agreement at the start around how it works. What if the worst case happens and one of the partners does want to exit? What happens in that scenario? Just so that you play out these scenarios and work out the plan if they do play out.
Yeah, so I guess having some of those tricky conversations up front when you do have your rose-tinted glasses on to prepare you for what is potentially going to happen, hopefully not, down the track, is quite a good advice, isn't it? Like, I've seen it happen in like communities where this is a bit of a random tangent, where they do like that kind of earthquake planning, like what are we going to do in the worst case natural disaster? It is almost like that, isn't it? You're planning for that worst case, you're running the situation so that if that happens, yes, you know what to do. Like, you can engage the people, but it's all written in contract. You don't then have to try figure it out once the goodwill's lost about what you're going to do to get through the situation.
Yes, absolutely. And like, don't get me wrong, there's some brilliant young people coming through at that, are keen and they want to get into farm ownership. So I think, and there's a lot of older farmers. Like, I think that Rabobank report highlighted it in the next don't quote me, but I think in the next little while there's going to be a lot of the farm owners are going to be reaching retirement age.
I think it was like $150 billion worth of assets need to change hands in the next 10 years. I don't know what the percentage of farmers it was, but
Crazy.
That is just mind-blowingly large.
It is mind-boggling. So, we're going to have to come up with some innovative solutions, I think, as an industry to get that, make sure that transfer happens well, because it's such an important industry.
I think
agriculture is critical.
Making sure that the industry does it well. I think it's important for the country that it happens well.
Absolutely.
Because you see the export stats. We know what dairy's export stats are. Sheep and beef, they're still a real critical foundation to our economy. Like, we just can't afford to have the bottom fall out of that as a country.
So that if you're an exiting farm owner who wants to leave and you've got a great team of people around you, they will know who the good people that they're connecting with. And as an up-and-coming young farmer, you need to make sure you're talking to your bank manager, talking to your accountant, talking to people and so those opportunities can happen, because a lot of it is you guys connecting people up, right?
Yes, that's right. I've just got there's a couple more tips that I can maybe pass on that, I haven't covered off yet. Did you want me to sort of go through them? So, for that younger generation, and I mentioned it before, equity is always a challenge. So, if you're that younger generation and you've got an aspiration to get into farm ownership, just think about how you can build your equity. What are the different ways you can build your equity? If you're not in KiwiSaver, that's one that it's an easy way to build equity. If you put your $1,000 in each year, you get $521 from the government. At the moment, I think that's changing. But that your employer contributes, so that just happens in the background. So that's one way that you can build an asset. If you're on a farm, get your options around building additional equity. If you're a share milker, you can ask the farm owner how many extra stock can you rear each year, and build stock equity is a great way of doing it. I know successful farmers up in my area. They started as 50-50 share milkers, and they've done really well and got into farm ownership. And so there is a pathway there still with starting off at the bottom and working your way up to 50-50, and then making the jump to farm ownership. So just think about your equity and how to build it. An off-farm investment potentially if you're in a position to buy a house off-farm. Then for the older generation as well as thinking how building equity both within the farm and outside the farm potentially, so that you start thinking about having a diversified asset base. So we do see quite a lot of our clients have the farm, but then they might invest in a commercial building or residential buildings and just build equity in different ways. So another thing that happens quite a lot up in our area in the Auckland region is subdivision. My great grandfather will be turning in his grave if you're talking about cutting titles off the farm and stuff, but there's opportunities there around protecting bush and creating titles, and it all helps. Equity is so important when it comes, building that equity is so important.
One tip on building equity, Ross, for farm workers that I wish that we had started, this is not something I've done, I heard it and I think it's a great idea. Often farm workers get provided a house and so they don't have to pay rent, yet they're earning a salary that's comparable if someone in town who is paying rent. So if you pay rent to yourself essentially, so I don't know, $300 a week or whatever it is that you would normally be paying out as rent into an account, you will very, very quickly have a deposit for a first house.
Yes.
And
right.
then if you continue to do that for as long as you're living in provided accommodation, you'll never miss the money because you've never had it to start with. So that's why it's really key that you start when you're in the farm assistant shepherd role, because it's harder to start once you've already, you've had that money. It could be a really good way to build up that equity really quickly without thinking about it, because you're essentially doing exactly what your friends in town are doing, which is paying rent, but you're just paying it to yourself rather than to a landlord.
Absolutely. And like the little things like that, they'll have massive payoffs later. I guess finding from my research, which I found quite interesting, was the succession plan should come from the parents. So the parents are the ones that have worked hard all their life to build up this asset and make the farm what it is today. So it's really important that the parents establish what their desired outcome is. What does it look like for them once the succession journey starts? Putting that together in a formal written plan, and thinking about how they communicate that to the child that's going to maybe succeed on the farm, and then also the ones that aren't. So they know then what's happening. Might not be perfectly what they wanted, but at least they know and they can start planning for it. And then when it gets to the time for everything to happen, it's not a big surprise, because that's what we find is when families fall out. Things come as a big surprise. They weren't expecting the outcome that has happened, and there's plenty of stories out there about succession not happening well. So if there's any, in terms of putting that plan together and communicating that plan, if there's any sort of unsureness about doing that, highly recommend engaging with a succession facilitator. So succession facilitators are they're experts in their field. They've dealt with hundreds of families to work through their succession plans, and they can even down to, helping work through the issues like communication and capability. If the capability's potentially not there with that next generation coming through yet, building that capability so they're in a position to take the next step. And what a lot of people don't realize is actually, a succession facilitator may cost in the vicinity of $10,000, but there is funding available through MB that will cover half of that cost. So,
Wow.
yeah, or up to half of that cost.
Is that through the regional capability fund?
Just reach out if you need the link, because I think it's in my research paper. So as far as I'm aware, that is still going. So and a lot of farmers don't know that fund's available.
That's a really great tip, Ross. You've given us so much to think on there. And, every time I think, how much more is there to learn about this succession? Everyone comes out with a whole load more gems. And it's not rocket science, but it's just doing the job well. The phrase "assumption makes an ass out of you and me" is always in my head. And I think from what you've said there about the conversations, because, brother one may be assuming this is happening, sister two may be assuming this is happening. Well, mum and dad have a totally different plan in their head.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's it.
I think my main takeout from this conversation today, Ross, was no surprises. Because, you've started off with good communication, bringing kids in early, and then just finished off with like having a written plan. And I think really what the thread is no surprises, and just keep that conversation building over time. But I think so many little practical takeaways in this episode. So thank you so much.
No worries.
And I also can link to your research. So if anyone does want to read Ross's whole report, it is available.
Just a disclaimer, it is more focused on the dairy industry. Yeah, a lot of the content probably is general across the ag industries.
Thank you for doing that.
Before we leave, what would be your top piece of advice, for people who are thinking, gosh, this is something that needs to be on the to-do list after calving? We will crack on with something. What's your number one thing about where to get started?
Oh, yeah, you've put me on the spot a bit there. Yeah, maybe if you start with that, seeing where the business is at from a financial point of view, having a meeting with your accountant and your banker, and just to understand how the bank and how the accountants view the business in its current state. That might be a good starting point to see if anything needs to change. And if that ownership structure isn't correct, talking to the accountant about when might be a good time to change that structure. Because if you're going to carry out succession, the structure is going to have to change at some point.
Yeah,
if
so
it's not in a company.
Even if it's years in advance, could be quite helpful.
Absolutely. And the accountant will know the right time to do that for tax planning.
They're two really great things. And I think the first one you said, like actually getting your accountant, your bank manager together to have that conversation and actually see what financial position the business actually is in and what they think of it, could be a really vulnerable place to start, and is going to take a lot of courage to actually have that conversation. But the whole thing's, you need a lot of courage. So yeah, really like those two wee steps. I think that's a great place.
Thank you so much.
All good. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. It's been good conversation.
Thanks for jumping on and having a chat with us about banking and farm succession and your research at Kellogg. Really appreciate it.
No worries.